morning and hello Malaysia. Welcome to MARIPOSA Talk Show. I'm your beloved host FATIHAH WAHIDA. So this is another special talk, and today we will be discussing about the Persian Gulf Crisis 2019. Before we go further, let me introduce 5 guests that we will be having today, invited specially to give us more understanding on this topic. First, we have Mr. SUBIKA bin JASMAN, a senior lecturer from University Malaysia Sabah, Mr. MUHAMAD MUBASYIR bin AZIS, a military analyst from the United Nations. We also have Ms. Sakinah binti SABRAN, a diplomatic officer from the United States. And lastly, we also have Mr. SAIFUL ABDULLAH, a political analyst from the United States. A little quick reminder to all the audience to follow us closely on our Twitter account MARIPOSA, and don't forget to give us feedback on today's topic through the hashtag MARIPOSA Talk Show, as we will go through your comments later on at the end of this talk. Without further ado, let's start off with the question to our first guest, Mr. SUBIKA. Can you tell us what actually factors that lead to the outbreak of this crisis?
Thank you, Ms. Nurul, for the question. If we respect on what actually happened in the crisis between the US and Iran, it actually started early in the year of 1951, but both of the countries managed to settle down the conflict by coming up with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Surprisingly, in 2019, the crisis started to rise again, which brought the conflict to a new level. And I believe that this is due to the decision taken by President Trump in withdrawing from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on May 8, 2018. He says that this agreement is one-sided, which brings no benefit for the US. So he announced that the US withdrew and launched a sanctions campaign against Iran to put maximum pressure on the country. Many arms control experts and European allies are against that decision, but it is applauded by Republican politicians Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iran has responded by increasing uranium enrichment in contravention of the conditions of the accord. The withdrawal is seen to signal a resumption of the Trump administration's rhetorical and military escalation with Iran.
Thank you, Mr. SUBIKA. That was an interesting fact about the start of the Persian Gulf crisis. So let's move on to our next question on what action has been taken by the United States towards Iran due to this unsolved crisis. Let us hear answers from Mr. MUAMMAR MUBASYIR.
Thank you, Ms. Nurul, for the wonderful question. So basically, when we talk about action taken by United States toward Iran in the war itself, I will specifically mention about the designation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) as a terrorist organization. Trump classified Iran's IRGC and FTO on April 8. United States has never called a foreign government branch a terrorist group instead of a non-state actor. Trump alleged RIGC supports global terrorism. This April 15 verdict increases IRGC and Iranian government anti-terrorism prohibitions. Under the INA and its 1969 amendment, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, the Secretary of State may designate a foreign organization as an FTO. Second, the Organization Act in or plans to engage in terrorism. Third, the group's terrorist actions undermine United States safety and security. Criminal use FTOs who oversupplies material aid or resources to a foreign terrorist organization or attempt or conspires to do so is penalized or imprisoned for up to 20 years or both. In a person dies, the perpetrator in imprisoned to any number of years or for life. Institution, any bank, a terrorist group, or an agent desires must alert the secretary. A bank breach requires secretary clearance. RGC members representative cannot enter the United States. State departments considers IRGC and FTO. IRGC and Iran were sanctioned for terrorism. Iran and the others may react Previous administration feared this would encourage assault on United States Security Service. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad MUBASYIR, for the explanation. Maybe we can hear some more answers on this question from Mr. SUBIKA, as someone who has been researching this matter for so long.
Thank you, Ms. Nurul, for the question again. So, one of the actions taken by the US is the military deployments. Following President Trump's statement that the US would withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a series of attacks happens in the Strait of Hormuz resumed from May to October 2019. The US Secretary of State quickly accused Iran of being behind the assault. As a result, on June 17, the US announced the deployment of 1,000 more troops to the Middle East for defensive purpose, and on July 18, the US dispatched an additional 500 troops to Saudi Arabia along with fighter jets and air defense equipment. The military deployments didn't end there. After drones attacked Saudi Aramco oil facilities in eastern Saudi Arabia on September 14, 2019, 200 additional US forces were deployed to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates on September 20, and on October 11, additional forces and capabilities were deployed to Saudi Arabia, including approximately 1,800 air defense personnel, fighter squadrons, and an air expeditionary wing. Furthermore, in response to Iraqi demonstrations with Iraq-backed militias aimed to seize the US Embassy in Baghdad, the Department of Defense ordered the deployment to Kuwait of an infantry battalion from the 82 Airborne Division's Immediate Response Force, with 750 soldiers arriving immediately and more than 3,000 military personnel arriving later.
Thank you, Mr. SUBIKA, for the detailed explanation regarding the action done by the United States. Of course, when such actions were taken by the United States, there would be some impacts that may harm the actors that are involved in this crisis. So let's hear some opinions from both Mr. Saiful and Ms. Nur Sakinah.
Thank you, Mr. Roll. Any crisis would bring to the deterioration of ties between both parties involved. As a result of the nuclear deal pull-out, the sanctions were reimposed. 2019 witnessed the kick-off of the Persian Gulf War, which started with the blowing up of 6 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, which led the US blaming Iran. This continued until December on the airstrike from US forces. In 2020, Qasem Soleimani was killed with a drone strike. His death has brought to Iran enragement and mistakenly shoots down a Ukrainian passenger jet and put the blame on US aggressiveness. When the coronavirus occurred early 2020, they seek help from the world leaders because they lack access due to the US sanction. In 2021, they decided to revive the JCPOA. However, the negotiations were put on hold and set to restart in November due to the Raisi winning the Iran election. All these events shows how Iran struggled with the US sanction on the nuclear deal restriction, which has brought to the deteriorating relations. I'm sure all the viewers want to know more. Mr. Saiful, if you may.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Sakinah. Due to this crisis, the oil market changed considerably in late April and early May 2019 when the United States declared that it would no longer provide permits to Iranian oil importers and would attempt to reduce Iran's oil exports to zero. At the time, Iran's export had already dropped from 2.8 million barrels per day during the JCPOA days to around 500,000 BPD. The possibility of further reducing oil shipments to zero convinced Iran leadership that it was under too big an economic threat and that it was time to change the strategy. However, the United States oil output has increased dramatically. America has become an oil exporter, significantly cutting its import of Middle Eastern oil, despite the fact that the Middle Eastern remains the world's greatest supplier of oil overall. The global demand for oil is increasing at a slower rate. Oil prices have risen as a result of the Persian Gulf conflict.
Thank you both to Mr. Saiful and Ms. Nur Sakinah. Alright folks, let's look at some of the comments that left by the viewers on Twitter. There's a lot of comments right here. For example, we have one from Mr. Ahmad saying, I'm having so much fun watching the talk of Persian Gulf crisis, #MARIPOSA talk show. Thank you. We also have a comment from Suzanne D saying, wow, it's rare to see Mr. Subika on the screen as he only interacts with the audience through the articles that he published. #MARIPOSA talk show. It is true. And we have this one long comment from Mr. Jason stated that the imposition on the new sanction against Iran has caused so much damage, especially to the currency of Iran, which losing 2/3 of its value, causing inflation to the food market. Despite of not having food and medication as subject to sanctions against Iran, the problems have been created in transporting the goods, resulting in imported inflation, which makes the import cost so much more expensive and unaffordable. Thank you for the input, Mr. Jason. It is unfortunately fact that we have to accept, and this is one of the, what's that called, effect of crisis between two countries to its people. I think that is all for the comments that we are going to read today, since we seem to be short in time. I'd like to thank again to our lovely speakers and also audience for joining us today and giving input about the Persian Gulf crisis 2019. I'm sure all the viewers and I have learned a lot and have so much fun, and I hope to see you all again next time. I'm your host, Nur FATIHAH. Have a good one. Bye.